Story 1. The Room. I don't remember my sister Aubrey very much, at least the real Aubrey. She was 7.5 years older than me, which alone was a big enough barrier that we didn't really get to know each other. However, what made things worse was her advanced cancer in her body. She was constantly in and out of hospitals due to her condition, which made it very hard for her to have a normal childhood. If I was lucky, my parents would take me to see her on the weekends, or if she was home, she was not really feeling up to doing much, which I don't blame her. Things with her would slowly get worse when I'd get into middle school. I remember the whole family came to spend some time with her before the inevitable was going to happen. As hard as things were for me, I knew that my sister had it way worse. On one of the weeks of my sister's passing, my mom's brother, Uncle Rob, came to stay with us for a few days. Uncle Rob was the coolest. He was my mom's older brother who lived out of state, but he was the coolest guy. He drove a big truck and co-owned a construction company, which made him secretly wealthy. Rob grew up with only sisters and had no kids of his own. So for whatever reason, when he came to visit, he made sure to make me feel special. I'm willing to bet that it had to do with the fact that I reminded him of himself. The Saturday he came to visit, he woke me up extra early, I think around 6 or so in the morning. My parents were still at the hospital with my sister, so Uncle Rob and I had the house to ourselves. At first, Uncle Rob waking me up on a Saturday at 6 was incredibly annoying. However, it didn't take him long to make me smile. "Hey Jake, let's give your gaming setup an upgrade," he said while hitting me in the head with a pillow. I sat up in bed and rubbed my eyes. My mom was strict on what I did with my free time. She didn't like the idea of me playing video games in another room when I could be spending time with family or with my sister, which was fair. But kids are allowed to have fun every now and then. "But, Uncle Rob, I don't have a gaming setup," I said as I began to stretch. "Oh my gosh, it's even worse than I thought," he said while pretending to write on a piece of paper and handed it to me. "Here, it's your prescription to have a cool gaming setup, effective immediately." I smiled and got out of bed. "Meet me in the truck in 2 minutes. We got a lot of work to do today," he exclaimed as he left my room and went out to his truck. I quickly got ready and met him out there. The early morning chill bit my face, but his warm truck quickly remedied this problem. "So here's the deal, my fuzzy little friend. I did some measurements and I noticed that one of the rooms in your basement has a huge closet," my uncle said as he pulled out of the driveway. "I'm willing to bet you that I could build you a secret room connected to that closet, and none of your parents would know. Perfect for a gaming room. What do you think?" My eyes lit up even more. "How would we do that?" I asked, astonished. "My parents will be home tonight. There's no way that we're going to get away with this." Uncle Rob gave me a look that said, "Do you not know who I am? I've been sneaking stuff past your sister all my life, and I've never been caught yet. Plus, you forgot that I'm the best, and I can do anything." Uncle Rob took us to Home Depot and picked out some drywall, paint, and other materials to help make this thing happen. He had all the tools he needed in the back of his truck. After Home Depot, we stopped by a GameStop and picked up a new console with games, controllers, and even a headset. "Alright, now I'm counting on you not to get caught playing too much, and if you do, don't tell them that I gave you this stuff," he said while smiling. We went back home and began working on the room immediately. The basement had been recently finished, but there were still supplies and debris left behind. Uncle Rob started right away and cut a 4-foot rectangular hole in the closet wall and got to work. Sure enough, behind the wall was a small opening, about 8 feet by 5 feet. Ideally, this was a small space to not really be able to do anything, but for a secret gaming room, this was perfect. After a couple of hours of laying carpet, building the setup, and covering the hole with a new piece of painted drywall, the secret game room was complete. At this point, I hadn't played much video games. Uncle Rob was able to show me a few things, but it took me a while to really get into it. My parents came home that night, and Uncle Rob and I said nothing about the cool room we just made. However, the excitement of the fun day came to a screeching halt as we were told by my parents that my sister's condition had gotten worse. Uncle Rob went home the next week, and my sister ended up having to stay at the hospital. Aubrey, my sister, ended up having complications in the next couple of months and passed right before my 13th birthday. Things were never the same. Not just for me, but for my parents. But as cruel as fate was, I still had to grow up without my sister, and my parents had to move on. 4 years later, I was on track to graduate high school and worked a job as a pizza delivery guy in my town. My town was small, so small that the beater truck that my parents gave me was able to handle the load of driving pizzas to the locals. Even at this point, my parents had no idea that my Uncle Rob had completely made a new room tucked away in the basement. I was able to talk to my parents into changing rooms so that the hidden game room was in my closet in the basement. I was needing money for college, so I worked overtime at the local pizza place in town. Most people knew me or my parents, so the job was pretty chill for most of the time. However, there were a few times that, driving late at night, that I thought I would see something, either in the road or just off the shoulder. Driving to drop off the last pizza for the night, I was driving to the more remote part of the town. It was early December, and the Colorado winter already provided snow to our small town. Most cars here are either equipped with 4x4 abilities or the drivers are experienced enough to not have any issues. I was driving down the dark street to deliver the pizza when my headlights came across a flipped vehicle. It took me a couple of seconds to process what I was looking at. Smoke could be seen coming from the exhaust of the overturned car, and the hazard lights were weakly flashing. Oh no, I thought, as I put my truck in park and got out to help. I called 911 on my phone and went to see if the person driving was okay. The way the vehicle was facing, I couldn't see inside the driver's side. Out of curiosity, I walked over to the driver's side just to make sure that everyone was okay. Sure enough, sitting in the driver's seat was an older woman. She was upside down but still buckled in the seat. The vehicle was still running, and the woman was surprisingly not injured, save for a small scratch on the forehead. "Hey, are you okay?" I asked while peering into the car. "Oh, I'm fine. Just a bit embarrassed is all. I can't believe I just did that. I just bought this car," the woman said, embarrassed. "Don't worry about the car, ma'am. All that matters is that you're okay. I already called 911 and that they're on their way. Do you need anything? Do you want me to stay till they get here?" "Thank you so much, young man. Well, I can't really get out of this car the way it's positioned, so there's not really much more you can do for me. But thank you," the woman said politely. "Well, I'll tell you what. I have to deliver this pizza really quick down the road, but when I'm done, I'll come back and wait with you until help arrives," I said in hopes to help calm the woman, or at the very least to be polite. "That's not necessary, but thank you for calling for help. I don't live far from here. I can call my husband to come help me." I walked back to my truck and got in. I was able to find the customer's residence, despite the home itself being poorly lit. A large man answered the door and handed me a crumpled $20 bill. I handed him 2 pizzas he ordered and offered him change, but he told me to keep it. I glanced at my watch and it was now 11:03. We were technically closed at 11, and I should have driven straight back and clocked out. But seeing how I would need to pass the wreck back home into town anyways, I decided to check up on the woman and make sure that help knew where to find her. I drove back to the dark road and the car was still there and running. Help had yet to arrive. I knew that the woman told me that I didn't have to check up on her, but I did what I would want someone to do if myself or a loved one got in a wreck and went to check up on them. The time I spent delivering that pizza could not have been more than 5 minutes. So naturally, I didn't expect the circumstance to change much. I got out of my truck and walked back over to the driver's side. However, something was different. As I approached the driver's side, I noticed blood coming from the driver door and leading out into the snowy woods. Did she somehow get out of her overturned car? I asked myself. But then I realized that the blood was far greater than when it was about 7 minutes ago when I last talked to her. I began to worry for the woman, as it would appear that her injuries were far greater than initially thought. I held my breath, as I knew I was about to see something I wasn't ready for. I peered inside the car, and sure enough, the top half of this woman was gone. Her bottom half was still hanging upside down and buckled into the seat, but the top half had been viciously removed. I gasped. Did something take her while I was out delivering this pizza? Or did I imagine that she was still alive? I looked to where the blood led to, which was directly into the woods that surrounded the road. I walked over out of curiosity to see if perhaps something did take her. The dark night made peering into the woods nearly impossible. I pulled out my phone and turned on my flashlight to get a better look. The blood led deeper into the woods, which was begging for me to investigate on my own. But seeing how I was next to the woods and something just killed this woman, I wanted to get back to safety. I walked back to my truck and waited for help to arrive, which they did about 10 minutes later. The first to arrive were paramedics. They parked behind the overturned vehicle and started doing what they could do to recover the body. I got out to tell them what had happened, but I was still in shock. "Did you call this in?" a man asked as he walked up to me. Yes. Yes, I did. I was driving by and I saw this car and called you guys." The paramedics talking to me thanked me and began walking back to the crash site when I said softly, "I talked to this woman when I drove by. She wasn't dead yet." The paramedic stopped and walked back to me. "What was that?" he said as he got really close to me. "Yeah. When I called you guys, the woman driving the car was still alive. I had to leave her to deliver this pizza and came back, and she was dead." The paramedic looked at me and shined a small light into my eyes. "Are you sure about this? You talked to her?" "Of course, and she was for the most part fine and coherent." The paramedics walked me back to my truck. "Listen, pal, thanks for the call and everything, but forget what you saw here tonight. Don't say anything to anyone, okay? It's for your safety. If you say anything to anyone about this, then they'll know, and they'll come for you." The paramedic then opened my truck door for me and told me to get out of here before the police arrived. Obviously, I didn't ask questions. I got out of there as quickly as I could while still being safe. I could see the other emergency vehicles ahead in the direction that I just left from. I got back to the pizza shop later than anticipated and got an earful from my boss. "What took you so long? That drive should have taken you 20 minutes tops." I hesitated before speaking, remembering what the paramedic told me. Sorry. There was a crash and I had to call 911 for them." My manager gave me a look to see if I was lying, but ended up not caring anymore, seeing how he was about to clock out. "Okay, whatever. Just be more mindful," he said as he locked up for the night. I drove back home wishing I had someone to tell about this experience, but I was so shook up with what just happened. Did me leaving get that woman killed? Or had I stayed, would I have ended up like her? These are questions that haunted me when I went inside my house. The lights were off inside. My parents were early birds, so they'd probably been asleep for a few hours now. I was tempted to wake them up to tell them what had happened, but I figured it was something that could wait till morning. Thankfully, the weekend was here, and I didn't have to go to school the next day, and my shift for the pizza restaurant wasn't until nighttime. So, like any teen being bored, I went to my room into the basement, and went into my hidden gamer room. I normally enjoyed staying up late, but something about this night was off. Perhaps it had to do with the fact that I was tired from school and work, or having to deal with seeing that top half of the older woman removed from their body being too much. But nonetheless, something about this night didn't feel right. Around 2 or so in the morning, I got a text from my mom. "Are you making that noise?" I looked at my phone confused. "What noise?" I replied. My setup was nearly soundproof, being in the basement. My parents shouldn't have even heard me scream if I did that, but I was being completely silent. My mom's text, for some reason, gnawed at the back of my head as I continued to play. About an hour later, I got another text. "Where are you?" Now I was scared. Why was my mom asking where I was at 3 in the morning? I was about to call my mom when I received another text from her, but the text didn't have any words, but 2 pictures. The first picture was taken in my parents' bedroom. The perspective was as if someone was standing at the foot of their bed. 2 figures could still be seen in bed, but their conditions were unknown. The next image is what really concerned me. It was mostly blurred with light, as if someone took a selfie too close and the flash was on, but I was able to make out 2 things from the image. The first was the eye of whoever took the picture. Whosever eye was in this picture, their pupil was not circular, but rather a bar, much like that of a goat. The second thing that I noticed, in the bottom right-hand corner of the image, was a mouth that resembled a dog or a wolf's. I paused. My mom was not one for jokes. She had become much more serious since my sister died. Whoever was texting me these images were clearly not my mother, but also currently in my house. I turned my game console off and removed my headset. Once doing so, I could hear everything above me. It sounded as if an animal with nails or claws was walking on the main level hardwood floor. Sounds of things crashing and even screaming could be heard. I knew right away that something was wrong. However, the sounds of whatever was upstairs seemed to move around the house. At one point, I could have sworn that the sounds made their way down the stairs and even into my room. I called the police and told them that there was someone in my house. I tried my best to be as quiet as I could, but seeing how scared I was, I felt like whatever was in the basement with me was for sure going to hear me. I told them my address and that I feared for my parents' lives and to get here as soon as possible. The 10 or 15 minutes it took the police to get to my house felt like hours. When they knocked on my front door, I nearly jumped out of my skin. By this time, whatever was in my house had made its way back up the stairs. I could hear whosever footsteps run in the opposite direction of the front door and out the back door, which led to the woods. I waited. I wanted to make sure that whatever ran out of my house was a good ways away before I tried to answer the door. After a few seconds, I slowly left my hidden room and made my way out of my room and through the basement. All the lights were off in the house. Whoever was just here didn't seem to need them. I ran to the door and opened it to see 2 sets of officers at the door. "It just ran outside." The 2 other officers ran around back while the other 2 came inside. I showed them my phone with the text images in my parents' bedroom and told them that I feared for their safety. The officers that saw my phone looked terrified. "Where's your parents' room?" "It's on the main level and on the left side of the house. I can show you," I said as I began to lead them to their room. "Why don't you wait outside while we check this out? You might not like what we find," one of the police officers said starkly while pulling out his pistol. One of the policemen guided me outside and into his warm cruiser. I sat in the front passenger seat and waited. I waited for the officers to come out, but they never did. More emergency responders arrived at the house, including the same paramedics from earlier. I was exhausted, but my adrenaline seemed to keep me awake. Finally, I saw the officers exit the home while guiding the paramedics who were carrying 2 separate body bags on stretchers. I got out of the cruiser and fell to the ground and cried. The paramedic from earlier recognized me and walked over and knelt down. "I want you to know that you aren't safe here. Whatever did that stuff to that lady in the car saw you. Not only that, but followed you home. I'm sorry about your parents." The paramedic stood up and walked over to his vehicle, while more police showed up at the scene. The library. A couple of years ago, I worked at Idaho State University in Pocatello, Idaho. At the time I was attending as a student, but I had just broken up with my boyfriend, and the holidays were just around the corner. Seeing how I came from a broken family and that I didn't have anywhere to go for the holidays, I decided to pick up a few shifts at the library on campus. Most students and teachers would be gone for the week, and I would essentially just make sure that someone was at the library so no one would steal anything or trash the place. The hours were pretty chill, seeing how the library would be open from 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. I would be working alongside a security guard for most of it, but in all actuality, I would just get paid to be sitting on my phone and answering any questions from students. That is, if any of them came in. What made this job unique, however, was that the rumor around campus was that the university was haunted. More specifically, the science lab that was located on the second floor of the library. The first day of the holiday break was quite startling. The campus itself was nearly isolated. The cold weather in the small town didn't offer much aside from the university, so many students rightfully went back to their hometowns. The first morning I clocked in, I was surprised to see that no one came into the library aside from Bradley, the security guard, who happened to live in this town. Bradley wasn't a student and was in his late 40s, but kept mostly to himself. The first day, he maybe talked twice, both times asking if I needed anything, as he went out to get a coffee or smoked a cigarette. Despite the little work I was actually doing at the library, I couldn't help but notice that the darker it got outside, the more on edge I was. This wasn't just in the library, but on campus as well. I felt like I was in a ghost town, or some colony on a distant planet, in which I was a million miles away from the nearest civilization. 7 p.m. hit finally, and I locked the doors to the library. Bradley had gone home early for whatever reason, and I was responsible for making sure all the doors were locked and that no one was hiding in the library. I went upstairs to the science lab, and sure enough, it looked just how I had left it earlier this morning. I couldn't even recall if anyone even went to the second floor, seeing how slow we were. I turned off all the lights and made my way through the dark library. I went outside and locked the last door from the outside. Even though Bradley was older and didn't talk much, I kinda wish he had stayed and gave me company. I walked through the cold, empty campus, all the way back to my dorm. The sidewalk lights were still on, as well as maybe one or two buildings that were partially lit, but aside from that, most buildings around me were dark. I quickened my pace, out of the irrational fear of someone making the most out of no one being around. I made my way back to the small dorm and enjoyed having the whole room to myself. Out of paranoia, I glanced out the window to see if anyone followed me, but I was only met with the sight of an empty campus and the slight snowfall. The next day, I repeated the same routine of basically doing nothing and sharing very little interaction with anyone. However, throughout the day, one of my professors ended up swinging by the library. "Hey, Ava," Mr. Andrews said with a happy expression. "Looks like you're running the show here, huh?" he said, gesturing to the library. "Yeah, I picked up a few shifts this week to save a little money. My plans kind of fell through at the last minute," I said with a slight hint of sadness. Well, that's no fun. I hope they pay you overtime for working so hard," he said jokingly. "Hey, I need to use the printer on the second floor, and then I'm off for the week. If I don't see you again, happy holidays," Mr. Andrews said while making his way up the stairs with his hands full of papers. I gave a slight smile and a wave as he walked out of view. A couple of hours passed and Bradley swung by the desk again. "Hey Ava, do you need anything? I gotta head out early for the rest of the week. My mom's in the hospital. Are you okay closing by yourself?" I paused. Truthfully, I would like him to be here since closing up by myself was something I was worried about. But my personality of trying to please everyone all the time ended up me blurting out that this was fine, even though deep down, it wasn't. Bradley let out a sigh of relief as he thanked me, and he clocked out at 5:30. I sat in the library by myself for the next hour without seeing a soul. around 6:45 with 15 minutes left. I then realized that I hadn't seen Mr. Andrews come back down from the second floor. He was a great teacher and friendly enough guy that I wasn't worried about being in the library alone with him, but I still needed to make sure that no one was left in the library after 7 o'clock. 7 came around and I began locking all the doors on the main level. As I was locking the last door, a woman approached the door and tried to pull it open. "I'm sorry, we just closed," I said through the glass. The woman on the other side of the door was older. The way she was dressed and her age told me that she probably didn't work for the school, and that she definitely was not a student. Her hair was matted, as if she hadn't bathed in a while. Her clothes told me that she was probably homeless and looking for a warm place to stay. When I told her that we were closed, it appeared as if she didn't know what I was talking about. She tried the door handle again, and I told her the same thing. "Sorry, we're closed," again, but this time slightly agitated. She seemed unfazed by this and just stood there and stared at me. I turned and left, seeing how this person was probably crazy, and that I needed to make sure that I closed up before I could leave. I went to the second floor to see if Mr. Andrews was still upstairs. All the computers were still off, but the printer was on. I went to turn it off, but saw that it was still in the process of printing, but needed more ink. "Mr. Andrews, are you still up here?" I asked in the empty computer section, but no one answered. I felt bad closing up the library if he was still inside, but I needed to go home. But in all fairness, he had just been here for a few hours and could have asked for help. Maybe he just left, I thought to myself. From the second floor, I happened to glance outside to the empty campus, just out of habit, and I noticed that the woman was still here. She was no longer by the front door in which I had locked, but she stood in the middle of the courtyard, looking directly at me. What is with this creep? I thought. Had this person been a man, I would have made a call to the police or to someone in charge, but seeing how it was an older woman, I figured that I could handle it if I needed to. In all honesty, I was hoping that she would just leave on her own. I did a quick run around the science lab and saw no one in there, so I made my way back downstairs. Maybe he left without me seeing him, I thought. I went to clock out for the night, but passed by the door the woman was standing at earlier. To my horror, the door that I had just locked minutes ago was now unlocked and slightly ajar. A chill went down my spine as I glanced outside and saw that the courtyard was empty. The woman was nowhere to be found. "Are you kidding me?" I whispered to myself. I did a quick inspection of the main floor again, and thankfully it was empty. I turned off all the lights and made sure to check all the doors again, and lock them properly. The walk back to my dorm seemed 10 times longer. I was constantly looking over my shoulder for the woman, making sure that she didn't follow me back to my dorm, where I'd be all alone. Thankfully I didn't see her, but I couldn't shake this terrible feeling that someone was watching me. I debated on walking past my dorm in order to potentially shake off anyone that was following me, but it was too cold for that, and the thought of walking 5 extra minutes seemed unbearable. Thankfully, my dorm complex required a key card just to enter, and even then, if someone was following me, they would still need to know which dorm was mine. I quickly went inside and locked the door behind me. It took me a few minutes to calm down to where I could think normally again. I began to relax and started cooking dinner. I put a show on just to have background noise so I wouldn't freak out and calm down. As I finished dinner and walked over to put my dishes away, I couldn't resist the temptation to glance out the window to satisfy my curiosity. Thankfully, when I looked out, I didn't see the weird woman standing in the courtyard. But what I did see was something that was equally as startling. Across part of the campus, I was able to catch a glimpse of the library and saw that the second floor light was now on. A light I made sure to turn off before leaving. "Oh no," I whispered to myself. It was now 11 at night and there shouldn't be a soul in that building, even any type of janitor. I debated on calling the police, but what would I say? That I left the light on? The rumors of the library being haunted crept into my mind, but I somehow knew that the woman from before was responsible for this light being on. I grabbed my jacket, my keys, and grasped the pepper spray I kept on my keychain. I could feel my anxiety rise with each step I took to get to the library. The cold snow crunched under each step I took, getting me closer to whatever was lurking in the library. The cold wind and the general emptiness of the campus reminded me of how alone I really was. If anything were to go down, I would be on my own. However, my responsibility to manage the library weighed heavy on my soul. The empty building sat back in the shadows, watching me slowly march to what I felt like was my death. The closer I got to the building, the more I felt terror grow. What was I going to find? Mr. Andrews wearing a hockey mask? A ghost or phantom waiting for me in one of the aisles? That one homeless woman with a knife, ready to carve me into pieces, waiting for me to leave the public eye? All I knew was that only inside will I find the answer. I reached the library and glanced around once more on the cold building that stood silent. The light which summoned me to my duty was no longer glowing in the night sky. Whoever was inside had turned the light off. I stared inside the glass door and viewed what little the dark building was hiding. I should just go back, I thought. The light was off and a decent argument could be made, then I just imagined it. Maybe one of the automatic lights just accidentally turned on and off by itself. I could spend hours speculating what I saw, or what I thought I saw, but all that mattered now was that I was here. I could very well turn around and head back to my empty dorm and fill my mind with brain-numbing media. Or I could have a little peek inside and verify to myself that I was not crazy, but also have a peace of mind that no one was going to vandalize my workplace. I exhaled a sigh, which fogged the glasses in which I was looking, snapping me out of my thought process. "This is stupid," I whispered as I turned to walk back. I took a few steps back in the direction of my dorm when I heard a sound coming from inside. It wasn't a scream of a tormented soul or a cry from a nightly predator, but rather a muffled cry of what sounded like a woman. It was even so faint, almost as if the wind itself could create such an eerie tune with the help of an old tree. I paused, standing in the middle of the walkway, turning over my shoulder and looking back at the building once again. The sound was more clear this time, more pure. If I had to guess, the sound would have been coming from the same room in which I saw the light earlier. But if that were true, then whoever was inside must have been screaming for me to hear the sound. I got my keys out and walked back to the front door. I wagered that if what I was hearing was coming from within, I would know right away when I opened the door. My warm keys dangled out of my pocket as I inserted them into the door and turned. The door unlatched and I pulled slightly to try to hear what I thought was coming from inside. I stepped in the doorway and closed the door behind me. The building was much warmer than outside. Once I closed the door behind me, I listened intently with wide eyes, straining my ears for the slightest of sounds of a potential unwanted guest. The warmth and the comfort did not last long. It only took a few seconds, and I was able to confirm that there was indeed someone in this building making noise. My heart sank in my stomach. I pulled out my phone and tried to call Bradley when I realized that I didn't have his number. I then remembered that I had the staff sheet on my desk inside. I silently walked through the dark lobby and over to my desk. The sobbing still being heard from above, I found Bradley's number and gave him a quick text. I sat under my desk in the dark office, hoping that he would reply. Instead, he immediately called me, causing my phone to go off. I immediately declined the call in order to stop the phone from ringing, but the sobbing from upstairs had stopped. A thumping then replaced the cries as whoever was upstairs had run over to the stairwell and began to descend the stairs. I held my breath as I heard someone exit the stairwell and enter the main area of the lobby. I texted Bradley what was happening and that he needed to come to the library immediately. He responded right away and told me that he'd be there in 10 minutes. Whoever was on the main level could be heard walking around. I assumed that they were looking for me. The way my desk was situated, the only way that they'd be able to see me is if they came behind the main counter. I pulled my chair in slowly to give the appearance that only the chair was under the desk. 10 minutes passed and still no sign of Bradley. I pushed the chair out slightly and figured that now was the time to try to get out of here. I lost where the person went in the building and figured that my odds to make it to the door were pretty good. I crawled out from beneath the desk and silently walked to the front door. Out of my peripheral, I could see that someone was standing in one of the aisles. I froze, paralyzed with fear. I didn't even breathe, I was so scared. The dull green glow of the exit sign casted enough light to process the image that stood before me. In front of me was a woman slightly slouching, facing the wall. Her hair was long and scattered. I could tell that whoever this was had removed their clothes, and I could see scars covering their body. This was a greatly disturbed person, and for the briefest of moments, my fear was nearly replaced by sympathy. My senses were on overdrive, as I soon became overcome with dread. Before I could process much more, the sound of the front door being opened caused me to jump. I sprinted over to Bradley, who had now entered the lobby, and turned on all the lights. "Ava, are you okay?" Bradley asked as I sprinted to him. "She's over there, in the aisle. Something's wrong with her." Bradley then pulled out a pistol from his back waistband and walked past me to the aisle. Firearms on campus were strictly not allowed, unless by law enforcement, but I wasn't about to complain. Bradley walked slowly from the beginning of each aisle and glanced down, while pointing his pistol ahead of him. After clearing the 14 aisles, he turned back to me. "She's not here. Are you sure you saw someone here?" he asked, confused. "Yes, there is a woman in this building." "I tell you what," Bradley said. "I'll finish looking around the building on my own and close up. I can handle myself," he said while smirking and nodding to his gun. "Worst case scenario, I'll call the police if it gets out of hand. You should go home." I nodded. I was covered in sweat and I was tired after a long day. "Text me if you need anything," I said as I walked past Bradley and out the door. I exited the building and walked back in the snow. I felt bad for calling Bradley, making him come back to work, but this was his job. I felt a huge relief as I made it back to my dorm and locked the door behind me. "That was nuts," I said while taking off my coat. I glanced at my phone, both worried that Bradley needed me for something, but also hoping that he would text me saying that he'd found the woman. I received neither texts. I ended up falling asleep quickly, but I didn't dream that night. I woke up and got ready for work and made my way down to the library. I went to put my key into the lock, but as I slightly pulled on the door handle, I felt that the door had already been unlocked. Either Bradley got here early and unlocked for me, or he forgot to do it last night. Great, I thought. I went inside and all the lights were still on. Before I made my way to my desk, I noticed a stain on the floor near the stairs. The dark carpet made it hard for me to distinguish what it was, but I saw that it led up the stairwell. I went over and was able to see that the stain continued up the stairs and onto the walls. I could tell that from the walls that the stains were indeed blood, and a lot of it. I didn't risk investigating further and ran outside and called the police. I told them that I had a reasonable suspicion that someone had died at my work and to send emergency units right away. The response time was incredible. Apparently there was an officer near campus that was able to take my call and met me outside. Not long later, other officers and an ambulance pulled up into the parking lot. The paramedics went inside and eventually exited the library with a body bag, and I was then questioned by the police. The police didn't reveal any information at first and questioned me about what had happened. I told them about the woman and how I called security to come take care of it. The police changed their expression from confusion to concern. After 20 minutes of heavy questioning, they then revealed that what they found was a mutilated body of a 47-year-old Bradley Whitfield on the second floor. His bowels had been removed and his head had been crudely removed. They then asked me who Ava Jepson was, and I told them that that was me, and how they knew my name. The officer looked at me with a blank stare and told me that they had found his head sitting underneath my desk.